Welcome to the ICS Radio Hour half hour with me, Eric, and
And me,
him,
Dwayne.
Dwayne. Good to see you this morning. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, as usual, it's not a brief description. We've got this series going about kind of how to buy things. We've, I think, chipped away at the edges of some technology talk, but we're going to dig directly in today about if you're buying, and then probably more specifically, if you're thinking of doing an RFP or you're being forced to do an RFP, how can you how can you take a little extra time and make sure that decision is a good decision? And let me pontificate just 30 seconds more. No matter what approach you use or what process you use, remember this: the time you invest now is very valuable because you're going to own this thing for years. Don't short shrift it.
Absolutely. And look, we've seen a lot of people actually do pretty good processes through their system, and not everybody does it. Lots of people are a little
I've
more
seen a
willy
lot of people
nilly
do
about it.
horrible processes
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
which is the
we've
whole
seen
point
we've
of
seen the
us
willy nilly
doing.
and the horrible, but we've also
Yeah.
seen some really good examples. We're not going
Yep.
to name names, although maybe we should tell them who they are. But they did a really good job and actually ran a pretty, I'd argue, a pretty fair RFP. Not everything did we win, nor did the people that you probably expected to win. But you went through a process that was pretty fair, pretty transparent, pretty open, and most importantly for both the buyer and the seller, pretty methodical.
Yeah.
So we're going to base, I think, a lot of this conversation today on kind of what we saw that was good out of a couple of these, um, and uh, and kind of pontificate a little bit on each of those points. So,
Well, and I think that's a good intro. And I'll boil it down. Take the time. Okay, I said that already, but I'm saying it again. But more specifically, take the time to understand not just the answer to some vague set of questions or even specific set of questions, but the how, the why, and the where. The old journalistic stuff, right? Maybe not all the W's or whatever that stupid thing was, but understand the behind the scenes thing. Understand the why, the how, and the sort of the where.
yep, yeah, absolutely. And then again, bringing together some of the things we talked about in previous shows, understand what you're trying to do, understand
Mhm.
your big ideas of what you're trying to get out of this product or get out of this thing or get out of this decision, and then take all that stuff and rile it into the actual process and build it out to something that you can actually send out to these vendors that you probably shortlisted or kind of slightly decided on pursuing or talking to more in depth.
Okay, let's start with one of the ones that always just gives me some sort of problem. Um, Integrations,
Sure.
right? Hey, do you integrate with product X?
Well, and
Right?
what's funny, what's funny about this is always one of the last things that people seem to talk about
Yep.
in the process. It's like you've got 10 million other things up front, and as an afterthought, you've got integrations. You've got these things that actually, which is funny enough, and we'll talk about this in a second, is sometimes one of the more important things. But depending on what the process that you're trying to run, depending on how you're trying to scale or build out this product and make this product a part of your bigger strategy, the integrations are all often a really important thing. So yeah, so let's talk about quickly about what we've seen about what's kind of gone wrong with integration. So go ahead, Dwayne.
Well, it's kind of just that, right? It's an extremely open and vague question about do you integrate with, let's not going to call anybody out per se, but hey, do you integrate? Here's a good security question. It applies, I think, to a lot of things. Do you integrate with our favorite firewall vendor? Be
Sure.
that Cisco or Palo Alto, or if you're old like me, Checkpoint.
Fortinet. We've
No,
named
no
them, we've named all the big ones now, so
Yeah, no disrespect to them.
we're free out of jail.
Yeah, no disrespect to them. I shouldn't have said if you're old like me. But anyway, so okay, yeah, I mean, I could say yes with probably everything in the world, but you think about it in our relatively previous past employer. It's like, okay, there's a lot of different ways I could integrate into those things. Some of them obvious, Some of them maybe not so. And I'll call two things very specifically out to just give you an idea. Hey, can I push rules to a firewall? Is that an automatic or a manual process or semi-automatic with human intervention? Okay, well, a lot of people seem to think that's a good idea. And you know me, right? I mean, I would always ask back, like, well, what do you want to do there? Hey, I want to push rules. We'll get to maybe some other choices here in a minute. It's like, and my question, of course, back to that was, why in the world would you do that, right? Or why would you do that automatically? Or even why would you do that semi-automatic? An ICS networking. It's truly frightening thought. Now people would say, well, I just want to see what kind of rule it would build and this, that, and the other. And I won't go any farther down that path. But another one, and one of our, again, prior employers integrations was, I'm going to give you groups of things. I'm going to tell you what the controllers are, what the HMIs are, and things like that, and push groups and assets that belong to those groups. And to me, extremely valuable, right? And probably a lot less dangerous. So again, I won't belabor the point, but there's two, even in just that one very small and short idea, there's two very different integrations. Think about what you're using the products for today.
So yeah, so let's dig into that quickly. So let's ask that question. What would a good question then be on if say you're writing up your your requirements document, you're going to send this out to 6 or 7 vendors or 3 or 4 vendors or how many it is, right? That you're going to go test basically for these things. What does a good question about firewall interaction look like versus a bad one? So of course the bad one I think would be as simple as, hey, what types of firewalls do you interact with? Or
Yeah.
hey, do you have integrations into my, Cisco firewalls? Do you do
Yeah.
that, or Rockwell or whatever? What would a better, more like thoughtful question look like on that kind of a
Well, let me
technical
give you
question?
one for that, and then I'm really going to go off on a tear.
Sure.
I think so. A couple ways of doing it, right? Let's just presume we're kind of talking to people with decent sized networks and systems. So first and foremost, are you talking about integration very directly at sort of the firewall level? So very individual, lots and lots of firewalls. Again, depending on your mileage may vary, size of your company. Or are you trying to integrate at some sort of managers, right? So there's, again, for almost all these guys, there's some sort of device manager, but then there's also an enterprise kind of manager where I'm managing zones or I'm managing lots of firewalls all at the same time. So some sort of call out as to specifically what part I want to integrate, and then specifically what am I trying to accomplish. So back to my example, so I don't have to build out other thought plans. Is your requirement that you really want to have the system build a rule and somehow integrate a automatic or semi-automatic rule push? And if you do, I'm not knocking you. I'm just saying you need to be specific about that. Or again, this is the other side of that is just, hey, I want that asset inventory. Again, something we all see as important. I just want that asset inventory to flow in a very summary kind of way so that I can build rules based on the type of the devices there. And of course, because of an ICS, right? Hey, I want to allow SIP, but nothing else, or I want to allow some port, but nothing else. And that's very dependent upon the type of device it is. Now, here's the rant. I've seen customers over, the many years is like, well, I don't want to tell the vendors what I'm trying to do because then, of course, they'll just say yes. Okay, so look, this is my rant about spending time building the process and then spending the time checking the answers. Okay, it's almost like an interview process too. I don't want to ask people if they know a programming language because of course they'll say yes. Get over it. Okay? Ask the specific questions that you're trying to get answered and you're trying to accomplish. And if you get a yes or a no in the completely horrible attribution to Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. Okay. So yeah, if you put a question on FRP and it says integration and it is specific and they say yes, then you need to get them to show you that one way, shape, or form. Prove it. Don't just take their word for it. Because there's a lot, and that's where, and again, that's where wishy-washy questions are bad, right? If I ask you a very general question, like, well, Eric, do you believe that you're a good machine for exchanging oxygen to carbon, whatever? You can say yes. It's a whole different question is, hey, Eric, what's your IQ?
Right. Well, and that brings us a great example of what we thought was so good about the one of the processes that we worked through was it wasn't just it was of course the traditional, when we started this process, this RFP process with this end customer, I think we thought
Customer
this was,
X.
yeah, customer X, we'll call him customer X, that's great. Customer X sent out the usual, giant list of questions, and we were like, oh boy, here we go again. Let's just answer yes to everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll add some stories and some detail to some of the stuff, but the answer is going to be yes to everything because it's just your general, questionnaire. But what ended up happening after that was a series of interesting things. So first of all, they sent out the thing. Hey, we're going to have an RFP. Here's all the questions that you need to answer for us. Great. Okay. Then about a week later, we got a call and said, hey, look, we're actually going to have an intro call. Right. The questionnaires weren't due yet, but the vendor came out, or the customer X came out and said, "Hey, we actually want to meet with everybody at once." And this wasn't one of those like blank calls where everyone's on the call and everyone's trying to figure out who the other vendors are. They said, "No, no, no. Actually, we're gonna talk to three vendors. The vendors are X, Y, and Z, and we're talking to all three of you individually, just to let you know, that's who you're competing against. And we're going to speak to each of you individually, and we're going to tell you how we're going to run this process. And we'll have questions, and you can answer and ask questions during that intro call." And that was actually a really first time we had certainly seen that. And it actually was a pretty interesting conversation. Now we had some back and forth before that initial conversation, but it was very good. And they got on this call and said, "Look, these questionnaires are due in about a week. Here's what we're generally as an organization trying to do. And here's what we want you guys to do. We're going to take the answers back. We're going to look at them. We're going to read them as a team. We're going to gather a bunch of questions. Then we'd like to really spend time with each of you guys as vendors. And we want to go through each of these questions pretty detailed with you and your whole team and the product up. And as much as you can you please show us how you answer these questions? And we'll do it live on camera." Which was like I said, it was a pretty shocking thing for most of us. None of us had, been able to do the kind of, lots of it had to do the tells, right? You'd have to answer the questions, but very rarely have you ever actually had to show the part of the show and tell. So I thought that was a really kind of a neat thing, and it ended up being great for a lot of us. I think it was great for the other competitive vendors there because everyone had the ability to show what made them special and show what made them different, and people could then dig in on different questions and different things. And they, quite specifically, I do remember this as well, said, "Hey, look, we expect you maybe to not have good answers for some of these things, and that's okay. We're not going to ding you. If you say no to one of these, we're not going to ding you yes or no. We're going to have some conversation and some way to have we're going to have some ways to converse around these topics, and we'll figure out whether it's important or not." So there's your general context to this. Now, how did that work out in reality, Dwayne, for you and me as a sales team?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you've got to, as we talk about all the time, you've got a better memory than me. I think it was two sessions of 2+ hours each
Yep.
answering that question, and I had no I mean, great. I'd rather it was productive, it was sharp, it was to the point. And I'll say a couple things about everything you just described, and certainly, as always, correct me if I'm wrong. I enjoyed the fact that they said these are your competitors, right? There's no reason as a customer, I'm talking to you, the audience, right now. There's no reason to keep that secret, right? Now you're going to argue with me about that, right? And I'll just tell you right now, all your arguments are wrong. And if you are telling a vendor, "Hey, your competitors A, B, and C," and I start bad mouthing them, then that tells you something about me, the vendor. Now, what I have done and what I've done for decades is I might say something like this. If you tell me, hey, your competitor is B, I might say, well, you look, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is their approach. I early in career got burned. You know, we all learn from our mistakes. Hopefully, I got burned many times by saying, "Well, they do this way." Well, I had old information. I was misinformed. Look, I certainly know in general what my competitors do, regardless of what market I'm playing in at the time. But I can't keep up with 5 to 7 guys. And look, the marketing and the information available to me is not the same as other things. But I would certainly look to the competitive marketplace and say, I'm not going to take bashing, but tell me what you think of their approach. Because, of course, what I'm asking when I say that is, tell me what you think of their approach and then tell me how your approach differs. Because I do want to know that. I do want to know your opinion of them. Now, maybe you're wrong, or maybe you're not well informed, or maybe you just, you're saying some pretty negative things. I don't want that. Again, personally, I've always tried to avoid that. But again, my long-winded point is, don't be afraid to talk about the competitors in terms of names. And of course, there's a lot of things you don't need to disclose. And then understand how it fits or how it doesn't fit your overall plan. And then, secondly, when we talk about that process, the other thing I liked about that process is the questions were, by and large, pretty clear. I spent a fair amount of time because they were very clear about what we were going to do. I spent a very, I'd say, above average amount of time preparing for that. And the good news for that is, hey, I'm not sure. There's a couple things on here I'm not sure about exactly how it works or how I might want to present that. I went back to my peers and that institutional knowledge base that was my customer or my employer at the time and said, hey, Bob, how would you show this? Or how? So anyway, my long-winded point there is by giving that vendor time to prepare in every way that's important to me, I'm not relying on the skill set of the SE alone. I mean, I assume and hope that everybody's a pretty good sales engineer. That doesn't mean they know every nook and cranny of everything they do. Look, I mean, we all, you get my point. I won't go on about that. So I guess what I'll say is I would encourage, obviously what we're doing here is encouraging you, the customer, you, the attendee of this podcast, hopefully, incorporate these things into your process. They're valuable. Be clear, be open. Secret RFPs don't do anybody any good because then you're not being clear about what you want. And then the vendor is making guesses about what you need. And they're always, as you said a minute ago, Eric, they're always going to say yes. If the question's unclear, then the answer is yes.
Yep. From your own perspective, right? From a certain point of view, everything's yes.
Look, it's not, and look, I'm not wearing a plaid jacket and white shoes and belt and trying to sell you a used car. If I don't understand the question, I'm going to say yes, if nothing else, so we can move the conversation forward and talk about it. If we somehow can't do that because of your process, that's not good for either of us.
No. And, just to go a little deeper on a couple comments, right, from the salesperson's perspective, right? First of all, the secret RFPs never work well because I, as a salesperson, am always desperately trying to figure out who my competitors are anyway. So I'm going to do everything I can to throw all these things against the wall and think about all the reasons why and try to strategize around all these different vendors. And if you don't tell me who those are, I'm going to use the firepower methodology. And again, I as a salesperson, I'm never going to badmouth people. I know certain people do. But I am going to try to basically create a narrative that pushes people in one direction. And if I knew who I was competitive against, I could just openly then say, hey, like you said, hey, I'm pretty sure this is their methodology. Again, I might be wrong. I might be distracted, but I'm pretty sure this is their methodology. Ours differs in this way, important way number 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it's a much more open, free, honest conversation at that point. And one that honestly makes it easy, I think, on the end, the end decider, the end, customer X, so to speak, because they can just say, look, here were the reasons why we chose the vendor that we, vendor number 1 when you were vendor number 2. It's not a It's not as big a deal. We chose them because of this. We thought your presentation was great, but this is the thing that we thought was more important all the way at the end. And it just creates a much more open kind of collegial environment. And again, it allows you, and I remember that very specifically, it allows everybody to come with their best, kind of their best bid, their best story, their best mindset, and it actually focuses things back on that customer and why they're going to make a decision, and trying to figure out the best solution for them rather than me trying to mentally figure out who the competitors are and how I'm going to, how I'm going to work around them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It focuses way back on the customer rather than the other vendors.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit, but in the overall discussion of secrets and non-secrets is a little bit of the why too. And I'll give you hopefully a relatively concrete example again from our relative past employer. Is an often competitive discussion was around this whole idea that in order to gain knowledge about a device, I could read the project files out of the management station, right? Okay. So there's a file on a project management station, if you will, and I'm blurring some distinctions here, but I can go read that file and understand a lot about the controller or the HMI by reading that project file. And so then, and here's the sort of the secret part, if we saw that question, hey, do you read project files, or sometimes it wasn't quite that clear in terms of question, then we would make immediate assumptions about who that was, because quite frankly, there was one or maybe sort of two vendors that did that. Okay, so let's take case number one, which you're running a secret RFP and you just asked that question. Well, look, that's sort of so far out of bounds. Of course, I'm going to say no. I know a minute ago I said I was going to say yes to everything. But that is specific enough that I can look at that question and go, yeah, I don't read project files. I know that. But if that's the sort of the beginning and the ending of the secret RFP, kind of nothing good comes out of that, right? It doesn't engender any of the why behind the why, or whatever question you always talk about. It's okay, I don't do that. And in the environment you described, which is sort of this free and fair exchange of information, then I can say, hey, look, Eric, I don't do that. But can we talk about why you think that's important? And maybe some other ways I get to that same data or same information. And I'm not going to dive into all that except to say that's an important conversation. If you ask that one question and you get a yes or a no, okay, we haven't exchanged any real meaningful use case data. But if you can say, okay, here's why it's important, and you don't have to name maybe specifically that vendor, that competitor. If you told me the competitors, I know. But here's why I want to do what I want to do. And at least I can come back and say, okay, that's fair. You understand I can get similar or same data in a different way. And then at least we understand the intent and the outcome, and I can show you if it's met or not met, as opposed to, yeah, I don't do that. The weight of that question was 7 out of 100. You lose or you win because,
points,
because like politics today, everything else is a dead even heat, right? So this one feature, kind of makes or breaks, and maybe that's okay if it's that important.
But most of the time, it's not really that important.
And this is
where defining that well-defined and then having a good open exchange of ideas puts everybody at ease and says, "Hey, look, yeah, this is one thing we've been looking at, but it's not super important." So I think we've covered that pretty well. So let's talk more about some other things that maybe went into some of these technical questions. Like, let's get some good examples of things. We talked about integrations being maybe something more important up front. Let's talk about some other things maybe that maybe people put at the end of the list that shouldn't be so much at the end of the list, or maybe should be dug into more.
Well, look, I mean, we're talking about security product here, right? And so by its very definition, sort of holds an important place in your overall architecture. Either there's a database there that has maybe every device you've ever deployed, or depending on what it is, maybe even has a lot of very specialized access to those pieces. So I mean, some very interesting questions there that I used to hear are you following good practices in terms of your development? Look, everybody's going to say, of course I am, but do you have pen test results? Can you know what? I'm going to run a pen test against your product. What sort of encryption do you have? What kind of safeguards do you have? Do you have all the minimum requirements? You know, is it like my Windows environment, right? Can I set the passwords? Can I make people change the passwords? Do I have role-based access control? Can I hide certain features? Look, I mean, you think of that as anti-up, but is it? You probably should again ask those questions. I think those are sort of basic questions, but they're important to get that checkbox, and they should be specific enough again so that yes or no questions can be relied upon. And back to your point, show me. This should take a half hour at most, but show me all these things, and then let's talk about the underlying architecture. How is this built? What are the componentry? What are the open source componentry? What's your SBOM? Look, and you're only going to get so much out of that. There's some of that's going to be secret, but I still want to know. I still want to ask the questions. I want to get a read on what the answers are. You need to understand how important to that vendor is the secure development of their product. And I don't know, maybe that's a little vague still, but hopefully.
Well, no, I think there again, it comes back to again knowing yourself in this own process, right? So, okay, we really want role-based access control in this product for X, Y, and Z reasons. Maybe because we internally use this version of Active Directory, and we realize we're not going to be able to use Active Directory in this product because it's built in the OT environment, and blah blah blah. But we want it to match up with something similar-ish to what we're doing on the IT side of things, or vice versa. We don't have any of this stuff, but we're requiring everyone who's coming into our environment starting on this date that we're going to do this type of secure coding practice, and we want to understand how yours fits into it because you're going to be you're going to be the first product in after this, and it requires it. Or hey, we're working in this country, and this country has this regulatory compliance issue, and look, we've got to meet it whether we like it or not. Or hey, we're doing some kind of our systems or our OT environment is building products for X, Y, and Z government, so it has to meet this requirements thing. All these things have reasons, right? And understanding, again, going back and understanding your own requirements makes it easier for you to explain this is an important question, this is an important thing on this questionnaire, or it's not all that important, right?
Yeah. As you were talking, something occurred to me that didn't when we were doing preparation, I guess. And it's you need to also set aside maybe your own personality a little here, right? I mean, put it this way, right? Most people they want to be liked, right? I mean, exception of me, perhaps. Hey, I'm gonna ask a question, and maybe it's an uncomfortable question, and then of course I'm gonna get an answer, hopefully, and what I'm saying here, trying to say here, is put aside that sort of general friendliness. Look, I'm not encouraging you to be a jerk, but ask a question. If the answer is, didn't give you the answer you want, in other words, it wasn't complete or you feel like you're being brushed off, don't, this isn't a social hour at a cocktail party. This is serious. Hey, do you do this? Or how do you do this? Well, that's secret or very vague answer. It's like you have to be prepared to say, yeah, I'm sorry, for me that doesn't really get it. Is there an NDA that needs to be signed? Do we need to talk to your legal team? Do we need to talk to the development team? Look, as a frontline SE, there were lots of things I didn't know about the internal architecture, the stuff that I sold, or maybe I wasn't allowed to articulate those things for whatever reason, right? So sometimes it's the case that you do need to escalate that inside the company, what you're buying from, and sometimes it is, there's a fine line between intellectual property and being open and honest. But so it's like, okay, what's the architecture? Well, it's a series of containers. It's built on this general platform. There's these open source and there's these. I don't know. Is that enough for you? Maybe not. Only you can decide. But if you need the next level of that, hey, is that something you can tell me? Is that something that's needed at NDA? And those kind of things, of course, should be done up front. NDAs certainly. Yeah, I think you get the point.
Well, I mean, I think make it short. Know what your truly kind of drop dead technical needs are, and then know what's wiggleable or what's negotiable, right? And don't feel bad about pushing on the things that are truly drop dead and important for you. You can
I
you can
guess
have
it's
an amazing product that meets 90% of the things, but if you're gonna have to sway or push back on one of the things. Hey, look, maybe that's not the perfect thing for you, right?
I, I guess they're all different examples of the same thing you already said, which is be specific and drive to the answer. But I'll give you one last one anyway, and that's API questions. Like we got the API question a lot, and the general thing of that was always just, do you have an API? And the answer is yes, I've got an API. It may or may not be the most horribly written, inefficient, um, poorly documented piece of garbage you've ever seen, but it is an API. So what are the questions you're really trying to get to, right? Are all the features um, approachable, or is it really just a database? Is it an API into the database? Is the schema published? Think about those things as well. Are you asking that with intent, right? I mean, are you really thinking that here is the user interface, here is maybe some exports and some pre-built integrations, but I'm the biggest company in the world, whatever that is today, and I've got developers and I've got specific needs, and I'm going to get into the API. If that's the case, then yes, you should be asking specific questions about the API. You should be getting probably a real demo of the API. The frontline SEs are probably not the right people for that. But again, proper preparation and knowing, hey, I'm going to ask these hard questions. I understand you probably have to get a special dude or dudette to go give me that demo, but I absolutely require that. And again, I know that's probably just one specific call out of a lot of things, but maybe something we always don't think about.
Yeah, and one of the other things I to kind of maybe put a nail into this one. One of the other things I think that people gloss over a lot, and they don't realize this is super important until maybe after they bought the product or really understood it, is what does a roadmap look like? What does the product development roadmap look like? What does the strategic and just general strategic roadmap look like for the product? Like, where are you really trying to go with this? What is the mission? What is the ultimate goal? And I think a lot of people ask that as a kind of a throwaway question. And in fact, I think that's a really, really important question. If you know where the company is kind of trying to move, and is it moving in a way that works with your general philosophy? I think that's a great thing, and it should be weighted heavier than maybe some other things. But really have them dig in. And again, to your point, maybe that's not a conversation that a salesperson's going to be able to answer that well, or maybe a frontline SE. Maybe you have to get someone who's in true product development or in true business, the true company strategy to really answer that question and understand it. But yeah, understand where they're going, because often those people they know where they're going. They know where they're trying to be going. Now, obviously, people change frequently and quickly, but you're going to generally get a principle of where people are thinking about what they want to do with this thing, right?
Yeah, I know we're going over our usual time, but I'm going to extend this just a little bit on you. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, I would say the same thing about that, only with some specificity. Um, ask for a roadmap. You're going to get 90% of the time a feature. Don't believe anything I say. This is Q1. This is Q2. Right? Here's what, and I think I'm saying back to you the same thing you just said in a different way. I want, hey, how, very few of us these days from a vendor side are a one-trick pony. So how does that integrate into your overall product plan? How do you're building a platform. This guy looks like the red-headed stepchild, as they say. How are you driving to integrate that? Or are you driving it in a different way? I can't divine from the 10 features you just named in random order what that means for your overall vision, which I think is what you just said, but maybe I didn't hear it the right way.
No, you heard
So
that correctly.
again, go into a roadmap session with specific intent, not just, well, I'm going to hear what I want to hear, or maybe I'm going to ask a couple questions and they're going to tell me that's in the mix, it's just not scheduled yet. Well, how important that is that to you?
Well,
If
and
it's
I
not
think this is the magic key to that part of the conversation, the roadmap and the future, future things is if maybe you felt like something you put in your mountain of good questions, your mountain of good answers that hopefully your vendors are giving you. If you feel like one of those is weaker, but you see that they're focusing very heavily on a certain part of the product or a certain, hey, they're very weak on their secure coding practices, but we see the things that are in their roadmap are actually all based on secure coding practices. Generally, generally you can see they're trying to move themselves in the right direction. And is that moving in the direction that you want them to move? Or is it going off and doing something totally different? Now you're going to always get a random mix of things, right? Everybody's going to be improving their API coverage. Everyone's going to be trying to improve their integrations. Everyone's trying to move their security. But are there certain things they seem to be focusing on a little more than others, right? Hey, they have a pretty weak they have a pretty weak user interface. Well, you can see a million things in the roadmap that's moving their user interface forward. Maybe we'll give them a little more of a pass on that one.
All right, last one for real.
Yeah.
Support, right?
Yes.
I don't know if I have specific guidance here, but as you said, the overlooked thing was roadmap. I say the overlooked thing is support. So decide up front how important is support. Now, everybody's going to say, well, it's really important. It's like, okay, well, how are you investing? Are you investing a whole FTE, a partial FTE, zero FTE in the administration of the thing?
A consultant.
Yeah, is it a MSP?
MSSP,
Is it an
yeah.
MSSP kind of thing that you can do it that way? I don't know. Okay, but realize, and we did have a different thing on this in operationalization, but this is support. So in other words, the administration of the thing. What happens when it breaks? And it all breaks sooner or later, right? Entropy is important as a concept to understand. So when it breaks, how are you going to do it? So as part of proof of values, I've had customers, make sure they had an account, and they would call in and deal with support just to see, what is the front end process of getting you into the bucket? Do they naturally and easily segregate you into the right person? Do you get to the right person? Are they knowledgeable, right? Now, sometimes that's a little tough to test. Again, the classic really vague thing is, do you have support? Like, of course we have support. Like, okay, is it 24/7? Well, yeah, but we got Eugene on the late shift in New York City, or is it follow the sun? I mean, again, nobody's maybe going to tell you exactly how they're staffed, but you can do some digging to find some of those things out. And then again, I think opening a case or dealing with somebody from support, even at the first level, can tell you a lot about that company and their support
Yeah.
issues.
Pick a pretty simple question and see how that goes through the support. Think of something. Yeah, hey, I'm locked out. I'm locked
Yeah,
out of the system. How do I get back in? Run that one through run up the chain. You'll see. Hey, actually, this one has to go to the email, and the email alias gets answered in X amount of time. It's a
yeah.
pretty easy test when you figure out, who it is. Now, can they game that? Can every vendor game that? Sure, they can. It's pretty hard though. It's lots of lots of customers, lots of time. Something's going to slip through. You'll get a pretty clear answer about
Yep.
what's kind of really going on back there.
Well, you've done it again. This time you've wasted 39 minutes of your precious time. But on a more serious note, I always and as always hope you got something out of this discussion. Um, no matter who you are or where you are, please, if you do like the content, all the normal things, click, push, subscribe, whatever it is you do, what you do, and more importantly, please give us some feedback. Tell us what you think.
Subscribe, like, and do all the cool things.
Yeah, well, no, and I'll take if it's constructive, I'll take criticism every day of the week. We're trying to help you in your career get better. So thanks for taking the time, and we'll talk to you later.